so we're running a little bit behind schedule. So I'm going to kind of try to condense some of this a little bit. It's going to be on the kingdom and business. If you don't know, I'm the CFO of TRX Arms. We have about 30 employees. I think it's 29 at the moment. God has blessed us a lot in the last 5 or 6 years. We've learned a lot of lessons about business. I want to focus primarily, though, not on the technical side so much as the principles and character side, because the technical is easy. The biblical principles is where you have to be very careful. Now, like I did with the marriage talk, I always like to start with the foundations. What we're dealing with is the Great Commission and the Dominion Mandate. The Dominion Mandate: be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds, heavens, everything that moves on the earth. Like, this is a commandment to Christians, and we also have the Great Commission. We're supposed to go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations and teach them everything that Christ has commanded. So Christians have these dual missions, and it's very easy to work on one or the other or mix them, and you should be mixing them. And when we talk about business, what we're talking about is basically how to do these things, overcome the effects of the curse, because that's a real thing. That's one of the foundational principles that we need to understand. God made man to work. As a result of the fall, the work that we have to do has gotten harder, but we still need to do it. And we can try to overcome the effects of the curse. So I have a series of verses here I'd like to share with you on basically what to avoid and what to seek after. And these are very important to understand, because so often, and really when you go into business, you need to get the heart attitude right. How many people have we seen and they seek business or a job? And I think, Ray Comfort put it really well. He's like, they're all about more money, thicker carpet, faster car. Like, they're obsessed with the pride of life. They're obsessed with what people see of them and the success that people see that they have. And often the people that seem the richest are deeply in debt. They're not successful businessmen. They're actually running in the red, but they look rich. And James 4, verse 3, you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. Okay? Going into business, are you doing it because you want to find a way to create more resources to advance the kingdom, or are you doing it so you have more stuff to spend on your passions? 1 John 2:15, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God, whoever does the will of God abides forever. Is your interest the pride of life type stuff, or is it doing the will of God? And this one's very interesting. Matthew 13:22. It's the parable of the sower. And as for that was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke out the word, and it proves unfruitful. Many Christians maybe go into whatever their endeavor is with at least some level of a good desire, but as they get further into it, the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches chokes it out. So as you think about business and advancing the kingdom through business, whatever that means, doing dominion work, be very, very careful. And something that we've discovered is in this next chapter, this next passage, Deuteronomy 8:11, it says, take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes that I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full and have built good houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply and your silver and gold is multiplied and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart is lifted up and you forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there is no water, who brought you water out of the flinty rock and fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and test you to do you good in the end. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers as it is this day. Bunch of important things there. In business, there's the challenges and struggles of starting a business. Those are, in many ways, technical and in other ways, character-based. But as you grow and succeed, you do start to run into this other component. Whereas things multiply and increase, you will be tempted to say, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. But remember, listen to this next part. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore. So he wants to bless you. He wants to grow you. He wants to give you good things in business or work as you work hard. But watch out when you start to succeed that you don't turn away from him and get ensnared by those riches. Those riches are not for you to have and enjoy selfishly. They're tools for you to accomplish more stuff. Now, there's another great verse, Ephesians 4:28. It says, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, that he may have something to share with anyone in need. All right, so I've kind of laid out some principles here. I hope this is helpful. I hope it's not too disjointed. I tend to put all my time and effort into the first lecture I give, and the marriage one seemed more important, so I put more of my effort there. And if you have any questions, catch up with me later. All right, so next point. In business, in life, in working, we should think big. We should recognize that we have a God that does want to bless us. There's this idea that poverty is next to godliness or something like that. And isn't it wonderful that the widow only had 2 mites to give? Christians don't care about money. Just be warmed and filled. Like this is not biblical. And I want to encourage you, if you have been tempted to think in this sort of rut, break out of it. Recognize God wants to bless you financially or in other ways. He wants you to be diligent. He wants you to take dominion, to multiply. And now that comes in a lot of different ways, and we'll get into that in just a second. But here's a little thought experiment. Let's say Joe earns $25,000 a year, $30,000 a year. His tithe is $2,500, $3,000 a year. But with him earning that little, tithing might be a real stretch for him. He might have a very, very modest standard of living, but he's not going to have any surplus probably to do anything to grow the kingdom. He can't really save much. But there's a lot of Christians I've seen that are very content to coast at this level. Whereas, let's say we could figure out a way to help Joe get to the point where he's making $100,000 a year. Well, his tithe just went up 3 or 4 times. If he keeps his standard of living about where it was before, he could tithe 50% and be putting away a significant amount of money towards savings or what other projects. His capacity to do things for the kingdom just increased dramatically. Yes, he also has more taxes, and yes, that's kind of a good reason, it seems in the minds, to avoid earning more. But I would admonish you to think big, but at the same time, don't get too big for your britches. Don't go for the flashy ways of making money really fast. It's going to be labor. Remember what I mentioned about the thief? The man who used to steal, let him no longer steal, but labor with his hands. They can have something to give. So if you're going to grow, you need to, it's going to involve labor. Some people will ask, is there a particular model that Christians should look at, that's going to be more profitable, more successful, or better for the kingdom, being an entrepreneur or being an employee or being, full-time ministry or something like that. And I would give you the example of Joseph to contemplate for a minute. Joseph was a diligent steward wherever God placed him. He wasn't a business owner. He wasn't an employee. He was a slave. But everywhere God put him, he rose to the top through his diligence. And what you will notice about him was he was fruitful, and he multiplied, and he served others in whatever capacity God placed him in. And another question, some people seem to think that being an entrepreneur is the only way to really serve God and grow and increase the kingdom. There's some people that are really not cut out to be entrepreneurs, is what I've observed. 10 years of being a good, solid, faithful employee would probably take the kingdom further than 10 years of failed business startups with debts and investors that have been betrayed and you haven't served them. In our business, I used to think that most people could start a business. And since having a business and growing it to where it is now, I've come to the conclusion that there's a lot of people that really aren't cut out to start a business. And I would use myself as an example of that. I actually tried starting a small business in New Zealand. I was the only one doing it. It was building and repairing computers. And I was technically proficient, but I had two big problems. I was really bad at pricing my services. I priced them too low. And I was really bad at going and getting customers. You'd think with really low prices I'd be good at getting customers, but I wasn't enough of a go-getter. I didn't have that piece of the drive that was needed to grow a business. And so the business didn't really make very much money, and I ultimately concluded I'm really not cut out for this. It's too hard to compete in this market. There were lots of Chinese businesses. All the vendors spoke Chinese, and it was very hard to get parts because I only had one supplier that spoke English. Her name was Sarah Lee. Yeah, I know. So when we came to T-Rex, you'd think okay, so if I can't do business, how did we start a successful business? Well, the answer is I didn't have the pieces on my own. Well, my brother Luke started the business. And if you know the three people that kind of started T-Rex, it's Luke, me, and David Noor. And if you know anything about us, you know that we're very different individuals, very differently gifted. I don't have a lot of drive. Luke has tons of drive. He has a lot of vision and a lot of creativity. I don't have as much, but I do have some of the strategic planning capability, and I can take care of finances and things like that. And then David Noor is an operations guy. He's got a scientific mind, and he's very good at following through. And as we were kind of putting this business together, I realized the three of us, well, I didn't have what it took to really get a business up off the ground, and Luke didn't either. He could start it, but sustaining it would have been very challenging for him. He was constantly always in growth mode, and you can't just always grow a business. You need to, continue the operations that you've started. And I wasn't good at the really day-to-day follow-through as well as David Noor was, but the three of us together had all the pieces that were needed to actually start a business. And by God's grace, I was able to recognize that. We were able to start working together as a partnership. So I would caution you to evaluate yourself very carefully and try to figure out, are you well cut out to be an entrepreneur yourself? Because at this point in your life, you may not be. Now, maybe you are later. Maybe now Luke could start a business all on his own, or I could, or David Noor could, because of the things that we've been learning and growing in over the last 6 years. But you've got to recognize your strengths and your weaknesses. We had an engineering intern this last summer, and in our initial interview with him, we were discussing, and he was 19 years old, but he knew a ton about firearms technology, and he was studying engineering. And I asked him if he would be interested ever in having his own business. We like to ask these sorts of questions. We encourage our people to try to start their own businesses. And his answer was incredibly wise. He said, yes, but I don't think I could do it on my own because I would just pursue projects that were interesting to me, but they wouldn't necessarily be viable in the market. And we're like, he knows himself well enough to know his strengths and his weaknesses. And then, we hired him, and working with him, I discovered he was absolutely right. He would love these nuanced, deep, technical things, and he would get all excited about them, but it's such a niche application. He would need someone that had a bigger picture mindset to help guide him and say, no. We don't need to make this fully automatic gizmo over here. We can't sell that to anybody. Yes, it's fascinating, but we need to find something that's viable. So he saw his strengths and his weaknesses, and we should all strive to do that ourselves and recognize when we might fit over here, or maybe we should not try to start a business. Maybe we should be an employee. Now, some people might be asking, what kind of business should I start, or what's a prerequisite for starting a business? The first thing I would say is know the industry you hope to go into. Make sure you're serving a legitimate need. I've encountered a number of people, they have an idea for a business, and for example, we make holsters. We've seen a number of holster companies, and it's almost like they've never shot a gun before. You go to try to get a firing grip on their handgun, and you discover there's no way to grab the handgun. The holster's in the way. They clearly should not be doing this. They don't have enough technical knowledge. Or maybe someone has this idea for a business. Maybe it's selling teapots that are made out of recycled teapots. It's just I made that one up. But it's dude, I don't think there's a market here. Or maybe they have a business and it does meet a legitimate need, but their margins are just too thin. You know, if you have a business and it's like, yeah, I can do this business and it'll make 25 bucks an hour for the rest of my life. It's like, you know, a business that only makes you 25 bucks an hour is probably not viable. You'll get stuck in an infinite loop. You'll have nowhere to grow to. There'll be no way to expand the business and bring other people on. You'll just be stuck forever at $25 an hour. You need to have a higher standard. You need to make sure that whatever you're doing is viable, truly viable, and has wiggle room. So if something is more expensive than you thought, it doesn't kill your business. As far as technical education or something like that, a lot of people think you need an MBA or an accounting degree or something like that. Like, no, you really don't. I joke with people. Everything I learned about business, I learned from video games. SimCity, SimFarm, stuff like that. Like, they all have profit and loss statements. They have balance sheets. You can learn all that stuff from a video game, and it's really kind of the least technically complicated part of doing business. I'm the CFO, and that's where I learned my accounting. This is a big part of business, is evaluating financial decisions. Here's this opportunity, it's gonna cost this, what's the prospect of making money on it? Is it viable? You know, you do that all the time in business sims on the computer. So this is easy, but you do need to know the industry, you do need to know what you're getting into. I personally love manufacturing. I'd never done it. None of us had ever done it before when we started making the holsters. I found it incredibly rewarding to take a box of incomplete components and finish them out and having a commercially viable product in my hand that I had made. It was rewarding. It felt like true dominion. You know, and yes, there were many long hours of getting very dirty, making holsters, but it was good. The other thing about it is with the internet, small boutique manufacturing, custom manufacturing is far more viable than it ever was before. In the old days, you'd make a gizmo and you'd almost have to sell it through a distributor. Well, the distributor takes a chunk of your profits. But if you don't have a distributor in the middle, if you can go straight to the customer, which you can with the internet, suddenly a lot of more stuff suddenly becomes viable. You know, I did a speech on this at a Hope School conference, and I used an example of making toy wooden guns. And I did the math, and I demonstrated using a single-car garage and about $2,000 in tools, you could make, if you could get the sales, which I think could be done, you could make about $250,000 a year from the single-car garage. These small-scale manufacturing businesses are have incredible potential because of the internet. So I'm going to come on now to my conclusions. I'm sorry this was as rough as it was, but I hope there was still valuable stuff in here. So conclusions are: know yourself. Understand that you may not be gifted to do your own business right now, and it would not serve the kingdom the best, the most, for you to try a business startup that's just going to crash and burn. You might do the most good for the kingdom as a business manager or maybe as an employee. But whatever you do, be it Joseph. You know, I'm going to start using this as a verb. Joseph, wherever you are. Just find some way to grow in what you're doing. And maybe it's not in business. Maybe your business, the job you have, you're treating sewage for the town. And there's really no capacity for you to do anything but your technical job over here. Go grow somewhere else. Have a Bible study. Train your children. Be an excellent husband. Do something, ideally every day, to grow and multiply in what you're able to do. And by God's grace, He will use that in your life, and you will see fruit. So be fruitful and multiply, and be diligent, and recognize that whatever you do, it is going to take toil. There's never going to be, well, I won't say never. You're generally not going to see rags to riches overnight. There's going to be many long hours of hard work that's probably humbling, and that's good.